It is shortly after 7 a.m. on Tuesday, February 28, 1967. 40-year-old Drahomíra Svoboda is hiding on the freezing roof of her parents' farmhouse in the village of Vlčice. She has just pushed her way through the cement roof tiles to escape the slaughter happening below. Inside the house, her husband is hunting her. He is armed with a heavy wood-cutting axe. Minutes earlier, he had dragged her into the bedroom, pointed to the bleeding body of her father on the floor, and told her, "Teď se připrav na to poslední." Now, prepare for the end. Drahomíra managed to disarm him and flee upward. But as she cowers behind the chimney in the freezing wind, she can still hear the screams of her children and her mother echoing from the courtyard below. She does not yet know that her husband's rampage did not begin here. 30 kilometers away, in their own home in Bukovice, 4 of her sons are already dead. By the time the sun fully rises over the Jeseníky Mountains, 7 people will have been murdered. Welcome to Cold Block. The Jeseníky Mountains form a harsh, unforgiving border region in the north of Czechoslovakia. In the winter of 1967, the small, isolated villages nestled in these valleys were quiet, snowbound, and insular. In the village of Bukovice, at house number 34, lived the Svoboda family. Josef and Drahomíra had been married since 1950. Together, they had 6 children: Josef Jr., Karel, Zdeněk, Elena, Luděk, and Libuše. To the outside world, they were a large, working-class family. But behind the closed doors of house number 34, the reality was one of escalating terror. The family tree of the Svoboda and Furmanek families is extensive. By the end of February 28th, this graphic will track 7 confirmed dead and 3 survivors. Josef Svoboda was born in November 1923. He was a man defined by his resentments. He worked primarily as a driver and a tractor operator for the local forestry enterprise. According to the official state security character reference, his reputation in the village was exceptionally poor. He was described as having a brutal, violent nature, prone to provoking arguments. His physical health was also failing. In 1953, he contracted pulmonary tuberculosis, which left him on a partial disability pension for several years. But his physical ailments paled in comparison to his psychological volatility. Svoboda was pathologically jealous. From the very beginning of their marriage, he accused Drahomíra of infidelity. He used these baseless accusations as justification to beat her relentlessly. He was not just violent at home. Svoboda's criminal record was extensive. In 1956, he attacked a neighbor with an axe, earning a suspended sentence. In 1960, he was convicted of attempted rape and public intoxication. In 1961, he assaulted a police officer. He was a man who solved every perceived slight with his fists, and when his fists were not enough, he reached for a weapon. The escalation of Svoboda's violence is thoroughly documented in police archives. On New Year's Day, 1960, he attacked a woman named Marie Griplova near a cowshed, attempting to rape her before being chased off by locals. In May 1961, after a multi-day drinking binge, he beat Drahomíra so severely she required medical attention. When a police officer arrived to investigate, Svoboda attacked him, grabbing him by the lapels and attempting to strike him. But the breaking point came in April 1965. Svoboda returned home and accused Drahomíra of having an affair while he had been in prison. He beat her with his fists, kicked her, and then battered her with a wooden club. The medical report notes a severe concussion, a suspected fractured skull, and massive bruising across her entire body. She spent 10 days in the hospital. For this, Svoboda was sentenced to 20 months in the Mirov prison. While he was incarcerated, Drahomíra finally filed for divorce. She stated simply that living with him was impossible. Svoboda was released on December 22, 1966. He returned to Bukovice. When he learned of the divorce proceedings, he made a promise recorded in police files. Žádal ji, aby se s ním nerozváděla. Jinak, že se pomstí. He demanded she not divorce him. Otherwise, he would take his revenge. The court scheduled the first divorce conciliation hearing for the morning of February 28, 1967. On the afternoon of February 27th, terrified that her husband would prevent her from attending the court hearing, Drahomíra packed a bag and took a bus to her parents' house in Vlčice. She left a note in Svoboda's pocket. It read, "Jedu do Vlčic. Dávám ti volnost a já ji chci po tobě. I am going to Vlčice. I am giving you your freedom, and I want mine from you." That evening, Svoboda traveled to Vlčice, argued with his father-in-law through a locked door, and demanded Drahomíra return. She refused. At 11 p.m., Svoboda took the bus back to Bukovice. He arrived at house number 34 shortly after 1 a.m. Inside, his 4 sons were asleep. The investigation conclusion states that between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., Svoboda moved through the unlit house. He armed himself with a heavy axe. Svoboda entered the shadowed bedroom. Nearest the door, on a cot at the foot of the double bed, slept his 17-year-old son, Josef Jr., the only one Svoboda truly feared could fight back. He struck the boy once with the blunt hammer side of the axe. Josef Jr. never woke. He then moved to the double bed. On the left slept 14-year-old Karel. On the right slept 13-year-old Zdeněk. 2 swift, brutal blows. Only Zdeněk managed to raise his hand in a final, instinctive reflex. The blow broke his index finger before the axe crushed his skull. Blood spattered upward onto the ceiling lamp above the bed. Svoboda then walked into the small kitchen, where 10-year-old Luděk was sleeping on an ottoman. He struck the boy in the head, leaving him dead on the blood-soaked pillow. Svoboda changed out of his bloodied clothes, put on his green quilted work uniform, locked the house, and walked out into the freezing night. At 4 a.m., a local police officer saw him walking toward the forestry garage. When asked where he was going, Svoboda calmly replied he was heading to work. He climbed into his assigned forestry tractor, a heavy machine with license plate SU15-43, and began the 30-kilometer drive back to Vlčice to finish what he started. At 5:30 a.m., the tractor suffered a blown front tire near Bukovice. Svoboda abandoned it and walked the rest of the way. He arrived at the Furmanek house around 7 a.m. He entered the kitchen, where his 61-year-old mother-in-law, Marie A., was preparing for the day. Without a word, he struck her in the head with the axe. As she fell screaming for everyone to run, he hit her again. He then crossed the hall into the room opposite, Jędrzejczyk's room, where his 63-year-old father-in-law was still in bed. Svoboda attacked him with both the blunt and sharp side of the axe, leaving him critically wounded on the floor. Hearing the screams, Drahomíra and 11-year-old Elena smashed through the window of the bedroom and fled into the courtyard. Svoboda chased after them. In the entrance hall, he encountered his 8-year-old daughter, Lyubusha, and struck her in the head with the axe. She collapsed unconscious in a pool of blood. He ran outside, caught Drahomíra on the road, and dragged her back into the house. He forced her to look at her mother lying wounded outside and her father bleeding on the floor of his room. He looked at her and said, "Teďa se připrav na to poslední. Z tebe udělám sekanou. Now prepare for the end. I will make mincemeat out of you." He swung at her, but Elena grabbed his arm. He turned and smashed the blunt end of the axe into Elena's forehead. Drahomíra fought desperately. She managed to tear the axe from his hands and throw it out the window of the room where her father lay. Svoboda punched her repeatedly, knocking out her teeth, then ran outside to retrieve the weapon. While he was in the courtyard attacking the neighbor Anna Kurova, who had come to help, Drahomíra scrambled up the stairs, climbed into the attic, and pushed her way out through the roof tiles, hiding behind the chimney. Unable to find his wife, Svoboda dragged the bleeding 17-year-old neighbor Anna into the barn. He found an unloaded shotgun and smashed the stock over her head, breaking the weapon in two. He then tried to hang himself from the rafters using a rope. The noose snapped and he fell into the hay. He gave up, walked to the pond behind the house, waded knee-deep into the freezing water, and began striking himself in the head with the axe. The blows were not fatal. He threw the axe into the water, climbed out, and started walking. In his abandoned briefcase at the crime scene, police later found the bus tickets he had bought the night before from driver Miroslav Kopecki, the paper trail of a man who had carefully planned his route to murder. Svoboda walked 2.5 kilometers until he reached the Hutberg stone quarry near Skorošice. At 10 a.m., as forestry workers watched from below, Josef Svoboda stepped off the highest precipice. He plummeted to the rocks below and died instantly from massive skeletal trauma. When police arrived at the Furmanek house, they found a scene of unimaginable carnage. 6 people lay critically wounded. A police dog handler, using a service dog named Aida, tracked Svoboda's footprints through the snow, leading investigators to the abandoned tractor, the axe in the pond, and finally, the quarry. Back in Bukovice, officers broke down the door of house number 34. They found the 3 younger boys dead in their beds. 14-year-old Karel was still breathing, but he was in a deep coma. He died an hour after arriving at the hospital. The autopsy protocols are grim reading. The cause of death for all the victims was massive crushing trauma to the skull and brain. The only sign of resistance from the sleeping boys was found on the hands of Josef Jr. and Zdeněk. Defensive abrasions, where they had instinctively raised their hands to ward off the axe. The investigation conclusion, filed in April 1967, officially closed the case. The perpetrator was dead. There would be no trial. Who was Josef Svoboda? To the state, he was a disabled tractor driver with a history of violence. To the press, he was a monster. On March 4th, the national newspaper Rude Pravo ran the headline, "Na místě hrozného činu," at the scene of a terrible crime. The papers detailed his prior convictions for rape and assault, noting that his wife's attempt to finally divorce him was the trigger for the massacre. But the psychiatric and police records reveal a man who viewed his family not as people, but as possessions. When Drahomíra asserted her independence, when she dared to leave him, his fragile, violent ego shattered. He did not kill his children out of mercy or psychosis. He killed them to punish his wife. He destroyed everything she loved, and then he destroyed himself, so he would never have to face the consequences. The death toll did not end on February 28th. On March 2nd, Drahomíra's father, Jindřich, died from his head wounds. On March 4th, 8-year-old Libuše succumbed to her injuries. On March 5th, the 17-year-old neighbor, Anna Kurova, passed away without ever waking from her coma. 7 people dead. Drahomíra, her mother Marie, and 11-year-old Elena survived. Drahomíra suffered a severe psychological breakdown and was committed to a psychiatric hospital in Bílá Voda. It was there, on March 30th, 1967, that police handed her a small paper bag. It contained the items found in her husband's pockets after his suicide. She signed a receipt for 97 crowns, a broken prim wristwatch, a comb, a lighter, and the letter she had written to him just hours before the slaughter began. "I am giving you your freedom," she had written, "and I want mine from you." Next time on Cold Block. The Iron Curtain has just fallen. For those desperate to escape communist Czechoslovakia, a kindly old man offered a secret path through the Šumava Mountains. But he wasn't leading them to freedom. He was leading them to the slaughter. If you made it this far, you already know what this channel is about. Like the video, subscribe to Cold Block, and stay with us. There's always another door.